talking about examples of non-vascular plants. Today what we're going to do is we're going to move into talking more specifically about non-vascular plants. Mainly I'm going to list the three types, which are mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. And hopefully Mrs. T and I will be able to go and do some collecting of these creatures. In Santa Cruz I got a special spot that I usually go to find them, and we'll pick some up and bring them in tomorrow. Typically a moss will have an example of the sporophyte generation here budding out from the top, and the gametophyte generation with these leaf-like structures down on the bottom growing into the ground. These are really short, small plants, and the sporophyte generation with the spores inside is a capsule and a stalk reaching up not too far above the ground, and this round insert here is what they look like when you see them on a log or growing by a creek or whatever. Liverworts, they're like we saw in the picture yesterday. They are flat and low growing, whereas the mosses are have the stalked sporophyte generation on them. Yeah. Hold on. Hogwarts. Okay. Vascular plants. One of the hallmarks of having a circulatory system, so to speak, in a plant is that they can grow up and away from the ground, up and away from the water, so that they can reach up to try to grab onto sunlight. Sunlight is their key to survival, because without sun they cannot make sugar during the chemical process of photosynthesis. Vascular plants have these vascular tubes called xylem up and phloem down, where water and nutrients, minerals and sugars move throughout the plant. And there's three main groups of vascular plants, and let's look at each one. Let's look at the first one, actually. Here we go. Seedless vascular plants. The seedless vascular plants reproduce with spores. So they don't have seeds, and examples of seedless vascular plants, very primitive. Let me go through what they are. Ferns, horsetails, and club mosses are the three types of seedless vascular plants. And here you can see a fern with the spores underneath. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, where you look under a fern and during certain times of the year you'll see those yellow clumps. It looks kind of like pollen on a bee's leg, but those are actually spores that are growing in spore capsules on the bottom of the fern's frond. Yeah, hold. Your immune system takes care of a lot of stuff if you inhale a spore, and usually takes care of that. Your digestive juices, pH 1 or 2, pH 2 probably, for stomach acid, will decay it. It's not usually a problem unless somebody has a super bad immune system. Seed plants now. Characteristics of seed plants is that they have vascular tissue. They reproduce with seeds and pollen, and I'll get into what those are in just a second. There's two types of seed plants, the gymnosperms and the angiosperms, and I'll go through each one of those in turn. Now you don't have to write these down. They will be online and live after class. If you want to review the lecture, you can do so at any time. Okay, Gymnosperm vascular plants, second group. They reproduce with seeds that are stored in a cone. Now these are typical pine cone type plants in addition to a couple other things. And gymnosperm, the name in Latin means naked seed, and the seeds function in plant survival during harsh conditions. There are some examples, however, of cone-bearing plants, gymnosperms, where harsh conditions like fire actually is the only thing that allows them to spread. And fire is needed for the cone to open and the seeds to spread out. And they spread only with the movement of fire across the landscape. And fire has actually not only been a human problem, but it's something that goes back millions of years. Fires have always spread across the landscape, and these types of cone-bearing trees have spread their seeds after all the other creatures have, been wiped out by the fire, and that's when their seeds are spread. Pretty cool. Okay, so here are the gymnosperm types. I mentioned the conifers. Those are your typical, large pine tree, spruce tree, and so on. This is a cycad, the one on the right there in the middle. It's a super primitive tree fern type thing. Down there on the lower left is a ginkgo. There's only one species called Ginkgo biloba. It's a super ancient type of a creature. Goes back 350 million years to the Devonian period, where they first are found in the fossil record. And it's a living fossil. It's remained unchanged for 350 million years. And there in the lower right is the strange plant called a neophyte, and it's about 3 feet tall and 5 or 6 feet wide there, and they grow in arid, dry conditions. Yeah. The ginkgo is in the lower left there. Yeah. Well, let's take a closer look at seed structure. There's two vocab words I'd like you to write down and memorize. Embryo is one of them, and an embryo is just a fertilized egg. And we'll talk about how that gets fertilized in just a second. The other vocab word that I'd like you to know is cotyledon, and the cotyledon is the structure inside the seed that will become the leaf, and it may store food for the growing embryo. And here you see 3 different types of seeds. One from corn, one a bean, one from pine tree. And characteristics of all of them are that it has a stem and a root with a cotyledon and an embryo that composes the embryo. And each one of them has stored food, kind of like the yolk of an egg, that will help the growing plant survive. This is you don't have to write anything down here, but just to note, the gymnosperm life cycle begins with a male cone that produces pollen grains, and those cells will eventually mature into sperm. The female cone, so there's male cones and female cones. The female cone, each scale on the female cone has 2 ovules at its base, and in time 2 egg cells form inside each ovule that will then go on to be fertilized by the sperm. The ovule closes and a pollen grain produces a tube that actually grows down into the ovule, and a sperm moves through that tube and fertilizes the egg cell. And we'll see this same process repeated in angiosperm type plants as well. The ovule develops into a seed, and the fertilized egg becomes the seed's embryo. And then wind, of course, disperses the seeds.